Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take your sources and really unpack the most fascinating insights.
And today, well, we've got excerpts from a big one, Yuval Noah Harari's *Sapiens*, A Brief History of Humankind.
Right, this book is definitely not your standard history textbook. It's quite a radical take on how we, Homo sapiens, went from being, pretty insignificant animals to basically running the planet.
It really is. Harari presents this perspective on our past that's, well, it's incredibly insightful. Sometimes it makes you a bit uncomfortable, actually.
Yeah, I can see that.
But it always gets you thinking, doesn't it, about what it truly means to be human. So our mission today is to really zero in on those key moments he highlights.
Understand how they shaped us, and maybe explore some of those deeper questions about our journey, our story, and, well, the meaning behind it all.
Exactly. We want to pull out those surprising details, the core arguments that Harari makes.
The things that make you see our past, and maybe even our present, in a totally new way.
So yeah, let's dive in.
Okay, where do we start? The very beginning.
Let's do it. Harari, he doesn't exactly paint a rosy picture of our early days. Forget that neat image of us climbing the evolutionary ladder step by step. He kicks things off with a really challenging idea. He suggests early Homo sapiens were, and this is his term, brother killers.
Brother killers. Wow, okay. That's quite a way to start. What does he mean by that? Were we just, naturally more aggressive?
Well, it's not just about aggression. He's arguing that it wasn't simply that we were, smarter or had better tools, though obviously that helped.
Right.
But based on the evidence he presents from the sources, it seems that when sapiens met other human species, like Neanderthals, our cousins, really.
Who were around at the same time, yeah.
We didn't just sort of peacefully coexist or outcompete them gradually. He suggests we actively, maybe even systematically, wipe them out.
Wait, hang on. So we might have actually caused their extinction? Not just out-evolve them?
That's the implication.
Right.
Yeah, it's disturbing.
Definitely. It suggests our dominance, right from the start, might have been built on, organized violence against our closest relatives.
It's a pretty stark insight, isn't it? Makes you confront the idea that maybe our rise began with eliminating others.
Yeah.
It sets a really different tone for understanding how we got started.
Okay, so if it wasn't just being tougher or smarter individually, how do we, these creatures who weren't maybe the strongest physically, end up taking over the whole planet?
Yeah, that's $1 million question, isn't it? What was the real game changer?
What was our secret sauce?
And this is where Harari introduces what's probably his most famous, most central idea, the cognitive revolution.
Okay.
We often think, it was our big brains, our tool use, maybe being social. But Harari says the huge leap, our actual superpower, was something else.
Which was?
Our unique ability to believe in fictions.
Fictions, you mean like stories, made up stuff?
Exactly. Abstract concepts, things you can't touch or see, things that don't physically exist.
How does believing in things that aren't real make you powerful?
Yeah.
That sounds backwards. Shouldn't reality be, the key?
But that's the genius of it, according to Harari. He argues this shared belief in collective fictions is precisely what allows something unprecedented. Flexible cooperation among huge numbers of strangers.
Okay, explain that a bit more.
Well, think about humans versus chimpanzees, an example from the sources. One-on-one, a chimp is much stronger, right? Probably wins that fight.
Sure.
Okay, now put 6 humans against 6 chimps. Humans can coordinate, make a plan, work together. They usually win.
Right, cooperation.
Now scale it way up. Imagine 10,000 humans versus 10,000 chimps. The chimps, they just can't coordinate in groups that big. Their social structure doesn't allow it.
Okay.
But the humans, united by a shared story, a shared myth, a common belief, maybe it's tribal spirits, maybe it's national identity, maybe it's a company mission statement.
They can organize.
Massively. They can create complex plans, hierarchies, strategies. They act as one huge coordinated force. That's the power of the shared fiction.
So the fiction isn't just a lie, it's like a shared operating system.
Yeah.
A common ground that lets us trust and work with people we've never even met.
Exactly. It's the glue for mass cooperation. The sources use the Apollo 11 moon landing as a great modern example.
Okay.
Think about it. Millions, maybe billions of people involved. Scientists, engineers, factory workers, politicians, taxpayers, people from all over who never met.
All working towards this one insane goal.
What united them? A shared belief, right? A collective fiction about human potential, exploration, national pride, scientific achievement, whatever it was. That shared story, that intangible idea, made the impossible happen.
It wasn't just the physics and engineering, it was the shared belief that powered it.
Precisely. And that ability to create and share meaning through collective belief, Harari argues, is what fundamentally changed our species' trajectory. Maybe the deepest insight into how we came to dominate.
Wow. Okay, that definitely puts a new spin on things. From wiping out Neanderthals maybe to landing on the moon. It all comes back to coordinating through shared beliefs.
It seems to be a core thread.
Which brings us to the next big turning point. Harari tackles the agricultural revolution. Now, the story we usually hear is, this was great. Civilization, progress, settling down.
Yep. And Harari drops another bombshell. He calls it, quote, history's greatest fraud.
Fraud. Seriously.
And a disaster.
A disaster. But cities, writing, art, complex societies. Surely that came from agriculture. Isn't that where we find a lot of meaning in human achievement?
He challenges that head on. He says, look, for the average person, life probably got a lot worse.
Worse. Yeah.
Think about the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Sources suggest they might have worked, fewer hours, maybe 4 or 5 a day, foraging, hunting.
Got a more varied diet, maybe more leisure time.
Exactly. Now compare that to the early farmer. Suddenly you're tied to the land. Working dawn till dusk, back-breaking labor, planting, weeding, harvesting, often relying heavily on just 1 or 2 crops, like wheat or rice.
So endless hard work and a less diverse diet. Okay, what else? Why a disaster?
Well, that population boom that came with agriculture, it sounds good, more humans, but
there's a catch.
Big catch. People started living in crowded villages, then towns and cities. Sanitation wasn't great. You combine that with a less nutritious, less varied diet.
People got less healthy.
Yeah, evidence suggests bodies actually became smaller, people were more prone to disease, and living close to domesticated animals. That brought a whole host of new diseases, jumping over smallpox, measles, plague.
Huh. So we thought we were domesticating wheat, but maybe the wheat domesticated us, locked us into this harder, less healthy life.
That's exactly Harari's point. It was a trap, in a way. The luxury trap, he sometimes calls it. More food overall allowed for more people, but the average individual's quality of life likely declined significantly.
Stability and growth, but at the cost of individual health and freedom. It wasn't necessarily progress for everyone, even if the species multiplied.
Precisely. And the impact wasn't just on us. It was catastrophic for other animals.
How so?
Think about biodiversity. Animals that roamed freely, like wild cattle, wolves, lions. Their numbers plummeted as we cleared land for crops and grazing.
While the animals we found useful
exploded in population, but under completely unnatural conditions. I mean, the source mentions staggering numbers. Something like 1.5 billion cattle, maybe 25 billion chickens on the planet, vastly outnumbering most wild mammals. They exist purely for our use.
And he connects this to modern factory farming, right? The continuation of that trend, immense scale, often terrible conditions, huge environmental costs like deforestation for agriculture.
Absolutely. The Amazon rainforest, for instance, something like 70% or more of cleared land is for cattle ranching or feed crops. It's a direct legacy.
It really makes you pause and think about the meaning of progress, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Was growing our numbers and power worth this level of suffering, both for humans initially and certainly for animals? It's a heavy question.
It really is. It forces an honest look at the consequences, the trade-offs we made. But okay, so we settled down, populations grew. How did we then connect these scattered farming communities into larger entities? How did we get towards unifying humanity across vast distances, say, around the first few centuries CE, long before modern tech?
Yeah, that seems like a huge leap. No internet, no planes. How do you get millions of people on the same page across continents?
Harari argues it comes back, again, to that superpower. Shared fictions. He identifies 3 big ones, 3 key intangible concepts that bridge those gaps. Money, empires, and religion.
Okay, fictions again. Even something like money. That feels pretty real when you don't have enough of it.
Huh. True, but think about what money fundamentally is. It's not just the coin or the paper. It's a system built entirely on collective trust.
Christ.
Yeah, the shared belief that this piece of metal, this piece of paper, or now these numbers on a screen, actually represent a certain value. And crucially, the belief that other people also believe it and will accept it in exchange for real goods or services.
So most of the wealth swirling around the globe is just digital data, based purely on everyone agreeing it means something.
Pretty much. That's the core insight. And the source uses the 2008 financial crisis as an example. What happened there? It wasn't a sudden shortage of physical stuff. It was a crisis of trust. Belief in the value of certain financial instruments just evaporated.
And a whole system wobbled.
Exactly. It shows how much our economic reality, our entire global system, depends on maintaining faith in these shared fictions, these agreements about value.
That's actually profound when you think about it. Okay, so that's money. What about empires? They seem pretty solid, built on armies and conquest.
Definitely built with force, yes. But Harari sees them as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, absolutely. Invasion, exploitation, cultural destruction, immense suffering.
The negative side.
But on the other hand, they also acted like giant melting pots. They forced diverse groups together under one rule, spreading common languages, laws, currencies, infrastructure.
Like Roman roads and laws.
Oh.
Or the British building railways and administrative systems in India.
Exactly. Over time, these imperial structures often fused different cultures together, sometimes creating a new, larger shared identity, even if it was imposed initially. They expanded the circle of cooperation, brutally often, but they expanded it.
So they unified people, even if violently, by spreading shared systems and stories about how the world worked.
Right. They created a bigger shared reality. And the third unifier, religion.
Okay, believing in gods or unseen forces. That seems like the clearest example of a fiction-driving behavior.
It's a prime example for Harari. Our unique ability to believe in deities, in afterlife, in sacred texts, and then to cooperate or, sadly, go to war with millions of strangers based on those shared beliefs.
Think about Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, uniting vast numbers of people across cultures and continents who would never meet.
Exactly. Providing common values, rituals, stories, enabling trust and cooperation on a scale unimaginable without that shared faith in something intangible.
So money, empires, religion, they're all different expressions of the same basic human trick. Building shared realities through collective belief in things we can't necessarily see or touch. Layering fictions on top of each other to connect us.
That's a great way to put it. It's how we constructed the complex world we live in.
Which leads us to the most recent and perhaps most dramatic transformation Harari discusses, the scientific revolution.
Right. And this one feels maybe more intuitive at first glance. Science equals knowledge. Knowledge equals power.
It seems straightforward.
It is in a way, but Harari uses this really striking thought experiment from your sources to show just how dramatic the change was. Imagine someone from the year 1100 falling asleep.
And waking up in, say, 1492, Columbus's time.
Life would still be hard, dangerous, but
fundamentally recognizable,
yeah.
Right? Peasants, lords, religion, basic technology.
Okay, yeah, familiar enough.
Now imagine someone falling asleep in 1492 and waking up in 1992.
Ooh, mind blown. Cars, planes, TVs, computers. Utterly alien. Maybe they hear an iPhone ringtone. They'd have no frame of reference. Exactly. The pace of change exploded. And Harari asks a crucial question. Why? Why did this revolution take off so dramatically? And why specifically was it driven initially by Europe?
That's a good question. China, for instance, had incredible inventions centuries earlier. Gunpowder, compass, printing.
Absolutely. They were technological leaders for a long time, so why didn't they conquer the world or have the same kind of scientific explosion?
What was the difference?
Harari's argument is provocative. He suggests a key factor was Europe's embrace of ignorance.
Ignorance. How does admitting you don't know things lead to power?
Think about it this way. European explorers like Columbus set sail, yes, for riches, but also explicitly because they admitted they didn't know what was out there. Maps had blank spaces labeled, "Here be dragons."
They were willing to admit the limits of their knowledge.
And crucially, they were willing to invest in finding out. Similarly, scientists like Newton weren't just interpreting ancient texts. They were observing, experimenting, calculating new knowledge, admitting the old explanations weren't enough. This culture, this mindset of, we don't know, let's find out, combined with competition between European states,
fueled relentless innovation and exploration, unlike, say, an empire that perhaps felt it already had all the important answers.
That's the contrast Harari draws. This willingness to admit ignorance and actively seek new knowledge became an engine for unprecedented power.
Which brings us to things like, well, the source mentions CRISPR gene editing.
Exactly. We've gone from observing the world to actively rewriting the code of life itself.
That's incredible power. Curing genetic diseases, maybe, but also altering evolution. Designing babies.
It pushes us into territory that used to belong purely to mythology and religion. The power to shape life and death, maybe even overcome aging or create new forms of consciousness eventually.
Yeah.
It's staggering.
It really is.
Yeah.
And deeply unsettling in some ways. It forces that question again. What is the meaning of this power? What responsibility comes with it?
Which is exactly where Harari leads us when he looks towards the future. He summarizes this whole journey, right? Cognitive revolution lets us cooperate through fiction. Agricultural revolution brings growth, but also misery and hierarchy.
Unification happens via money, empires, religion, more shared fictions.
Then the scientific revolution gives us this almost unimaginable power by admitting ignorance.
Now, looking forward, he uses the term Homo Deus.
Godlike man, because, look at what we can do. Cross continents in hours, walk on the moon, manipulate genes, things that would have seemed divine miracles just centuries ago. We wield immense power.
So after tracing this entire epic, often brutal story,
Right.
What's the final takeaway? Where does Harari leave us? What's the meaning of it all for us now?
He leaves us with this incredibly powerful, very sobering thought. It kind of sums up the whole human condition as he sees it. He says, quote, "Humanity stands at a crossroads of heaven and hell. History hasn't decided our end, unknown where chance will lead us."
Wow. A crossroads of heaven and hell. That really lands, especially thinking about the power from science, the pace of change with the Fourth Industrial Revolution happening now.
Exactly. We have this species uniquely capable of creating shared realities through stories, a species whose progress has often had terrible unforeseen costs. And we've now arrived at this moment of possessing godlike technological power.
The meaning of our journey isn't fixed. It's not written in stone by the past.
No, it's being written now by the choices we make with this power. The question he leaves hanging, the choice we all face, is which door are we opening? The one towards some kind of heaven, maybe overcoming disease, poverty, suffering, or the one towards hell, ecological collapse, engineered inequality, dehumanizing technology. History hasn't decided for us.
That was quite a journey through millennia. This deep dive into your sapient sources, it really shifts your perspective on the whole human story, doesn't it? And the big questions it raises about who we are.
It really does. From those potentially uncomfortable origins, as brother killers who mastered cooperation through believing stories, to becoming these planetary managers, often at a huge cost, we've ended up here wielding this incredible, almost frightening power. It demands some serious reflection on our nature, our values.
Thank you for bringing these sources to the deep dive. It certainly gives you a lot to think about regarding the meaning of our collective path.
And for you, the listener, maybe here's a final thought to carry with you, connecting all this back to right now. If our unique power comes from believing in shared fictions, from ancient myths to modern money, what new fictions, what new stories are we creating today with the immense power of science and technology? What kind of future are those stories building for us? And standing at this crossroads Harari describes, what choice will you make?